Hello, you sentient ball of stardust. My name is Casey Davis. I'm a therapist and I'm an author of the book How to Keep House While Drowning, where I talk about ways to make it a little bit easier to take care of yourself when you're overwhelmed, stressed, have mental health issues, physical health issues, or maybe you're just in a hard season of life. Maybe you're looking for a place that you can come and listen to some practical advice. This is a podcast for all of the self-help rejects. We're going to talk about skills for survival and self-kindness. And I'm going to leave the pop psychology at the door. I promise not to tell you to meditate or to journal. We're just going to give you some really insightful conversations with hopefully some practical advice. So I don't believe you need to pick yourself up by the bootstraps. I don't want you to just try harder, and I don't believe that laziness exists. So join me over on Struggle Care, where we can find compassionate solutions that help us function a little bit better.
Are you struggling to conceive? You have options, and at Piedmont Reproductive Endocrinology Group, we'll make sure you have the guidance and support you need. PREG is known for individualized fertility care that's unique to every patient. We take the time to provide a reassuring and empowering experience because we believe that you deserve nothing less. Let us help you on your journey to parenthood. Visit us at pregonline.com to learn more. Get the guidance and support you need at Piedmont Reproductive Endocrinology Group.
Stoveleg Media, igniting conversation.
Hi guys, happy Friday. I'm Elena Grace and you're listening to I've Been Thinking. Today is episode 7, really exciting for me and hopefully for you guys as well. And our topic today, we're going to be talking about the Milgram experiment and keyboard warriors, which I had planned out already, and I think it's super relevant to things that are going on right now. So I don't really have much business to cover. Oh, actually, I will announce our next book club book is going to be The Last American Man. I will post it on Instagram, and I'm working on getting a Facebook page set up too for the podcast, but I'll post it on our social. But The Last American Man is a really awesome memoir of Eustace Conway, written by a female, actually friend of his, and she just does this incredible job of talking about him. And I thought that for the weekend of July 4th, because it'll come out on July 3rd, I think, is that Friday. For the 4th of July weekend, you know, what better than a book with, you know, a kind of Americana theme. I went back and forth on it, thought maybe should we do something historical, whatever, but The Last American Man is actually one of my favorite books that I've ever read. And it helped me do a lot of soul searching, I guess. Really made me think about things in some new ways, which is what I'm all about. So hopefully it will do the same for y'all. Yeah, so that is that. Forgive me if I'm a little bit scatterbrained right now. I've had more coffee than usual. So if you know me, you know that caffeine makes me a complete psychopath. But anyway, let's get started. So, have you ever heard of the Milgram experiment? You may have, and you may have not even realized, you know, exactly what it was. My boyfriend actually suggested this topic to me, and I thought it was brilliant. And as he described the Milgram experiment to me, I realized that I had heard of it, I believe, in one of my anthropology classes in undergrad, and it stuck with me, even though I didn't remember or connect the name to the experiment right away. the experiment did really stick with me because it's such an interesting and, frankly, I think decently well done, especially for the time period that it was done in, experiment on human behavior. So, beginning in 1961, a Yale psychologist by the name of Stanley Milgram began what would become an iconic study focusing on the conflict between obedience to authority and personal conscience. He was inspired to begin these experiments by the Nuremberg war criminal trials, during which many Nazis were accused of acts of genocide. Surprise. So these Nazis often justified their actions as obedience. We were just following orders. We've all heard that argument from Nazi sympathizers, whatever. They were just following orders, right? So Milgram implemented this experiment in an attempt to answer whether Adolf Eichmann specifically was his, I think, inspiration. So in an attempt to answer whether Adolf Eichmann, one of the key Nazi players who made the just following orders defense, and the other million Nazis who were also complicit in these war crimes, were just obeying orders. Can they really be called accomplices? How innocent or guilty are they to these crimes? So, to test the question of how far people would go in obeying authority, even if it involved hurting another person, Milgram began by advertising for male participants to take part in a learning survey at Yale. The fact that they were male, I think, is relevant because, obviously most of the Nazi officers, most of the Nazis in general were males. So I think that is relevant, although I think that to be able to apply this to all of humanity always, you would have to extend it to females as well. But anyway, I'll touch on that a little while later, in a little while. So procedurally, the volunteers were all introduced to and paired with another quote-unquote volunteer. And they each drew lots to determine who would play the part of the learner and who would play the part of the teacher. However, the draw was fixed so that the volunteer that had signed up to, come do this survey would always be the teacher, and the quote-unquote learner role was a fake participant who he was an actor who was in on the game and hired by Milgram. So the learner would be taken into a room, and they attached electrodes to his arms and everything. And I'm assuming that they let the quote-unquote teacher, the volunteer, see this so that it was more real. But I'm not totally positive. I couldn't find in the research that I did whether or not they did see them being set up and everything. But they did get to meet them at least. And then the teacher, that actual volunteer, and another actor who we're calling the researcher went next door to a room with an electric shock, thing. And I know that's a horrible way to describe it, but a big electric shock range, I guess you could call it. And on this piece of equipment, there was a row of 30 switches marked with their respective voltage levels, beginning at 15 volts, which was a slight shock, and then it goes up and then like halfway or whatever, it says danger, severe shock. So these are the labels on there as well. It's got the physical voltage number, and then it has slight shock, danger, severe shock, and then at the very end, it just says XXX. So the whole situation was that the learner was given a list of word pairs to learn, and then the teacher would test the learner, the teacher being the volunteer, would test him by naming a word and asking for its partner from a list of 4 choices. So it's multiple choice, right? The teacher / volunteer is told to administer a shock every time the learner makes a mistake, and to increase the shock by a certain level each time they make a mistake. The learner, being an actor, would purposely give mainly wrong answers so that the teacher kept having to increase the shock. When a teacher, volunteer, refused, the experimenter in the room, who was also an actor, would give a quote-unquote prod, beginning with, "Please continue." If the teacher / volunteer did not obey that command, they would be told prod 2. The experiment requires you to continue. If they still do not obey, they were told prod 3. It is absolutely essential that you continue. And finally, if they still do not comply, prod 4. You have no other choice but to continue. So this experiment was aimed at understanding how easily ordinary people could be influenced into committing atrocities. For example, the Germans in World War II, or shocking a random stranger to death in the room next door because he got a word wrong. So Milgram found through this experiment that 65% of participants / teachers continued to the highest level of XXX, 450 volts. All of the participants continued to 300. This experiment and the 18 variations he administered of it prove rather significantly that people are likely to follow orders given by authority figures, even to the extent of killing an innocent person. So before we continue any further, I do think it's really important to note that the variations of the experiment do prove that under different conditions, the obedience levels will change somewhat. So if the experimenter is absent, if there is an experimenter in plain clothes versus in a lab coat, if there is a change in the perceived importance of the location, so like a laboratory setting versus a random office building, that kind of thing. And then also social support, if there are other people doing the same things. Those all change the level of obedience that is shown. This experiment and the other variations also raise some serious questions of ethics, sample bias, so having only men, choosing volunteers from only like the area right around Yale University. That makes it really difficult to apply nationwide. Choosing only participants from the United States makes it difficult to apply worldwide, culturally. So those kinds of things. Ethics in terms of, he's making people think that they're killing somebody, so that's problematic. And he's lying to somebody, which he argues is necessary. And honestly, I do kind of agree that it is necessary for the purpose of the experiment, and he does debrief them afterwards. But anyway, long story short, this is not an experiment that I think could be done even remotely the same in today's world because of these ethical and bias questions. But even acknowledging that, I still think that the findings are pretty significant and that they are something that we need to think about and that can be applied, right? So now, keeping all of what we just spoke about in mind, we're going to talk about something else really quick. Something that, again, I think is really incredibly relevant to things that we're experiencing today. You've heard of keyboard warriors, right? They're actually defined by Oxford Languages as a person who makes abusive or aggressive posts on the internet, often concealing their true identity, though that is not a necessary component. It sounds like a lot of people in this social media age, honestly, but it's especially pertinent today as we think about the conspiracies and honestly just shitty things being said around the coronavirus, the protests in the wake of George Floyd's murder, the Black Lives Matter movement gaining more traction, just everything. People say freaking crappy things about people, about movements, about diseases, whatever. There's all of this space for people to say awful things online, essentially behind a mask, and to not even think about who they might be hurting or the fact that they might be hurting someone when they do that. So now, think about the Milgram experiment again. This teacher/volunteer is being told by a person of authority, quote unquote, that they have to shock somebody. Most times ending in what would be a deadly shock that is literally marked with XXX, the literal international symbol for this will frickin' kill you. But even though the volunteer meets the person before the experiment, the other person, and they believe that they were randomly chosen to be in these respective positions and that each had equal likelihood to be the one being shocked. There's all of that, and the teacher still is willing to shock them to death. But, on the one hand, they're just doing what they're told, right? But on the other hand, even though they know that there is a person in that room next door and they can hear their cries, a person that they have physically just met just a few minutes ago, they can't see what this person is going through as they're shocking them. So it's just not quite the same in their brains, I guess. So, in the same sense, we know that the person on the other side of the computer screen is a person. Well, usually, theoretically it could be a bot or whatever. But for this argument, we know that they're a person, right? So why is it that it's so easy for us to dehumanize what we know is a person online just because we can't physically see them, eye to eye? The same way that Milgram's teachers were able to separate themselves from their humanity during these experiments and shock another person just because they're being told to, yes, but the physical separation and visual disconnect, I theorize, make it easier to dehumanize the person on the other side of that wall, right? So Is this perhaps why it is so much easier to call another person names, to generalize an entire group of people, to roast somebody into oblivion on social media? Is that why we speak about celebrities and influencers and internet entities with this sort of detachment as if they're not real people? And why it's so easy to pass cruel judgment on them for, heck, maybe things that we have done ourselves, but we judge them for it, right? Is it because they don't seem like real people to us? And, is that why it's so easy to generalize a group of people, or maybe easier in some ways to generalize a group of people and use quote unquote them and you people style references to further ostracize them from us, whatever we consider to be us, and attempt to undermine their right to both an opinion and to their basic humanity? So why don't we think more on the effects of our words as internet trolls, as Facebook racists, or as anti-something or another on Twitter will have on the lives of others? And I'm not just talking about a feud over coffee versus tea, Although stupid things like that do become big issues, especially when some hyped up freak hiding behind a cartoon profile picture and a vague name decide to tell you to kill yourself because you prefer Earl Grey to a macchiato. That's awful, and it's important to recognize that that totally happens. And, to an extent, that's what I'm talking about here. But it's important to understand that even with such a stupid, trivial subject as the point of the argument, I suppose, the vitriol and the lack of empathy for another human is there regardless. And that's what we're experiencing, I think, on a large scale with people on social media, on, whatever. People are more able to separate themselves from the humanity of a group of people when they're not being made to think of them as a person. And the mass media plays into that as well, because, think about the difference between saying there's a group of protesters, I guess, and there's a group of people protesting. Even that, protesters, makes them something a little bit different than a group of people. And it's really interesting how we are being conditioned in a way, and in other ways conditioning ourselves, I think, into not seeing other people as people as us, if that makes sense. You think the only people that are people who look and think like you. Pocahontas for you there. But I will say that I do think that people are having a harder time, in a way, being this kind of vitriolic on social media nowadays, especially in the post, don't fuck with cats world, where being a nameless internet troll is more difficult, and where anything you say can and will be held against you in the court of the internet, and will probably be sent to your employer. Shout out to all the people who have said crappy things on Facebook and ruined their business that they created for themselves, to all the Amy Coopers of the world who get caught on video being a crap bag and get fired for it. I am grateful that employers are taking responsibility for who they hire, and that people who own small businesses are being held responsible for how they act. And then I'm also thankful that people are voting with their dollar, because I don't think that enough people think of things that way. And that is one of the things that, one, my parents taught me, and that, two, my college advisor taught me. He said, you vote with your dollar. He hasn't bought a Johnson & Johnson, I think it was, product since like 1972. I don't remember what they did to piss him off, but they did something. But anyway, the point is, people are realizing that they should be more thoughtful about what they say, if for nothing else than self-preservation, which is crappy because, like, why aren't you careful of what you say? Because you could make another person want to kill themselves or something, I don't know. But it's like the same concept as when guys are like, oh, I'm so scared to even kiss a girl. What if she says she didn't want it? Well, you should know if she does want it before you try to do it. So, like, why don't you already think about your actions and how they'll affect somebody else, rather than assuming that your freedom to let whatever you want roll out of your brain and off of your tongue is inherently more important than how it might impact someone else? Why don't you think about what you're doing before you do it? Just let's try that for once. So to conclude, I really want to wrap this up by asking you a question. Do you think about the person on the other side of the screen, whether it's the rando in your DMs, the childhood frenemy that you're friends with on Facebook, who, the uncle that you are furious every time he opens his mouth or types on the computer, whoever it is, do you think about the person that you're typing to, or do you think about who might be reading what you type as a human, And do you even care? It's kind of, it's kind of an interesting dichotomy, and it is one of those, you have a right to say whatever you want, but at what point do your rights end? Do your rights end where your hand meets another person's jaw? Or do your rights end at their personal bubble, and you should never have entered that bubble in the first place? Definitely something to think about, especially in terms of the internet. On that note, I want to leave you all just considering this weekend, I suppose. Let me know definitely what you thought about this episode. I hope that it was enjoyable, and I hope that it left you with something to ponder. And I hope it leaves you thinking about the other person on the internet as a little bit more of a person than you might have thought before. So thanks, guys, so much for listening. Again, our book club for next month is going to be The Last American Man. I'm going to post it on social soon. And yeah, follow me on Instagram at I've Been Thinking Pod. My personal is in the bio if you want to follow me there. I sometimes will post things about the podcast on there too. And I hope you all enjoy your weekend, or whatever day it is. Thanks, guys, so much. It's been fun. This is Elena with I've Been Thinking, and I'll talk at you next week. Bye.
Hello, you sentient ball of stardust. My name is Casey Davis. I'm a therapist, and I'm an author of the book How to Keep House While Drowning, where I talk about ways to make it a little bit easier to take care of yourself when you're overwhelmed, stressed, have mental health issues, physical health issues, or maybe you're just in a hard season of life. Maybe you're looking for a place that you can come and listen to some practical advice. This is a podcast for all of the self-help rejects. We're going to talk about skills for survival and self-kindness. And I'm going to leave the pop psychology at the door. I promise not to tell you to meditate or to journal. We're just going to give you some really insightful conversations with hopefully some practical advice. So I don't believe you need to pick yourself up by the bootstraps. I don't want you to just try harder, and I don't believe that laziness exists. So join me over on Struggle Care, where we can find compassionate solutions that help us function a little bit better.
Are you struggling to conceive? You have options, and at Piedmont Reproductive Endocrinology Group, we'll make sure you have the guidance and support you need. PREG is known for individualized fertility care that's unique to every patient. We take the time to provide a reassuring and empowering experience because we believe that you deserve nothing less. Let us help you on your journey to parenthood. Visit us at pregonline.com to learn more. Get the guidance and support you need at Piedmont Reproductive Endocrinology Group.